indicative of where things are. Don't you hate the end of the semester? I hate the end of the semester. You should just do nothing. Okay, so on a number of different occasions we have talked about the importance of Constantine's conversion to Christianity. And one of the things that comes out of that was his move to moving the capital of Rome to Constantinople in 224. And what this did was a 10-minute article online that begins to talk about this. Is it opened up Western Europe, the western part of the Roman Empire, to numerous invasions. And Rome is sacked for the first time within 100 years of Constantine moving away in 410 by the Visigoths. And you can see this on the little green lines on the map. And followed very quickly thereafter in 455 by the Vandals, who also sacked Rome. And historians have looked back at this period after the armies have really followed Constantine to Constantinople, and the perimeter of the old Roman Empire is left open. We've talked about this as the migration period because of the great migrations of non-Romans back into the areas that are now left unprotected because Constantine has moved the seat of power to Constantinople. Okay? So we get a lot of movement into the old Roman Empire by non-Romans during the 200 years following Constantine's decision to move to Constantinople. We already looked at the Ostrogoths and spoke about them when we were looking at Ravenna. Remember that that's part of this migration period. The Eastern Goths moved into Ravenna at the end of the 5th century, around the 490s, and eventually run into conflict with Emperor Justinian in Constantinople, which we talked about before. In one of the art fixes, we talked about the Anglo-Saxons moving into Britain as part of this migration of people into the old Roman Empire. This also brought the Lombard peoples into northern Italy, why we call it Lombardy today. Also brought the Burgundian people into Burgundy, that's why we call that region that way. And it also brought the Franks into France, which is what we're going to talk about today, is the aftermath of the Franks coming into what is today France, what the Brits, what the Romans called Gaul, G-A-U-L. And the Franks moved in already in the middle of the 5th century, around the same time Rome was being sacked, the city of Rome was being sacked. But they soon convert to Christianity and establish a very tight relationship with the Pope. Already by the year 500, the Frankish people have a solid relationship and a mutually beneficial relationship with the papacy. And what the papacy is going to do is to look to them now for military support, because Constantine is too far away and otherwise focused, right? So they're going to watch his back, if you will, in the way that the old Roman emperor used to. Going to replace that role, right? And this relationship begins 495 or so, right around 500, and between the kings of the Franks and the papacy in Rome. And it continues to develop and tighten through the coming centuries during this migration period. Obviously, the papacy sees the need for this because the city's been sacked a couple times already, right? And who's left there primarily is the church, okay? So, coupled with that, the fact that the Byzantine emperor seems to care less and less about Western religion, about the church in Rome. The emperor in Constantinople has his own religious advisor by this time. Take that all into account, you realize that the papacy had to realize that they needed someone else. And the kings of the Franks presented that possibility. And this relationship between the papacy and the Frankish kings, the French, we don't want to call them French yet, the Frankish kings, is cemented in the year 800 when the Pope crowned Charlemagne as the Holy Roman Emperor. This is a brand new title. In the year 800. In fact, on Christmas Day, no less, Charlemagne is crowned as the first Holy Roman Emperor. This causes a lot of students quite a bit of difficulty because it's easy to confuse Charlemagne and Constantine, because they both stand on the sort of pivot point, don't they, that involves Christianity in one way or another. Constantine's the one who converted back around 300, whereas Charlemagne is the first Holy Roman Emperor. And this decision to create this new position as Holy Roman Emperor was intended really as a poke in the eye to the Byzantine Empire. And in fact, it comes right in the middle of the iconoclastic controversy that we talked about, which probably has a lot to do with it. Because you have to imagine that your Byzantine emperors think, hey, I'm Roman, and I'm Christian, so who the heck are you? Right? This is really cementing the divide between the two parts of the old Roman Empire, the East and the West, even though that divide had grown and grown and grown. So Charlemagne is our first Holy Roman Emperor, around 800, and we called him and his immediate family who succeeds him as that, in that title, we call it the Carolingian dynasty. This is the first dynasty of the Holy Roman Empire. Like the Carolingian dynasty. And Carol is simply Charles in German, right? Karl. So this is why Carolingian, right? The dynasty of Charlemagne. Okay? Now the manuscript looking at your right was commissioned, we think, either at the moment of or in memory of Charlemagne's coronation as Holy Roman Emperor. This is why we refer to it as the Coronation Gospels. Right? It commemorates his elevation in status at the hands of the Pope to the role of the first Holy Roman Emperor. And as a book for Christian use, it only contains the four Gospels. In fact, most early Christian Bibles don't have the entire Bible in it. They will more often than not just be one part of it. So in this case, the Coronation Gospel simply has Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Right? The four Gospels. And some extra material that you would use during the Mass. But for the most part, that's it. So it doesn't have the Acts of the Apostles or Paul's letters to the Ephesians and all of that stuff, right? Or any of the Old Testament for that matter. It's just the four lives of Christ, the four Gospels.
I think just to backtrack a little bit, you said the Carolingian dynasty was the first dynasty
of the Holy Roman Empire. Right, Charlemagne is actually really only Charlemagne and his son. Well, actually, son it's complicated. But the only two that are really centralizing power are Charlemagne and his immediate son. His son's name is Louis the Pious, or Louis the Pious. And when Louis the Pious dies in the year 840, so 40 years later, it's a pretty good run, not bad. Certainly not Roman, but not bad. Louis decides that the empire's gotten pretty big, because the reason that the Pope crowned Charlemagne is Charlemagne has pretty much conquered like all of this, right? Northern Italy down to here, up into Denmark, right? And so he's looking like the game, right? He's really the man. And it's looking like this could be real, right? He's really consolidated a lot of the old Western Empire of Rome anyway. He's actually gotten down almost into Spain, right? And so there is this sense that this is the new deal, right? The real deal. And that's part of the reason the Pope decided that let's create this new position. It's not just because he wanted extra help or really wanted just to piss off the emperor. He realized that Charlemagne, you better get on this bandwagon, right? You just move now.
He was trying to save Rome.
Well, I think certainly the papacy, as any court, has got a lot of money, right? And it has all the things that normal earthly courts have. And that's, you need protection, and he'd seen already, going back originally when they first formed the alliance with the Franks, it's with Clovis the First. Don't worry about it, right? But Clovis is the old Frankish spelling of Louis, Clovis, you can see the similarity, right? Clovis, baptized Christian, and was recognized by the Pope as being in an alliance, right? And that was sort of mutually beneficial. The Pope's blessing on Clovis and eventually his blessing on Charlemagne in a bigger way substantiates the power. That's what he gets out of it, right? But in return, the papacy gets somebody who will stop these marauding Visigoths and Vandals. Right? That's where we get the word vandalism. Stop them from coming in and taking everything away, destroying everything, right? So this is really kind of a mutually beneficial relationship. Yeah.
What would it be mutually beneficial? Because people who are making a lot of money, how do they offer any of that?
Good question, and I don't know enough about my political history to be able to answer you. My guess is that Charlemagne's doing pretty good on his own as well, and I'm sure that when you broker these sorts of deals, there's got to be things passing hands one way or the other as well, right? So, back to our manuscript here, right? This manuscript was made to commemorate the coronation of Charlemagne as the first Holy Roman Emperor, and you'll notice that manuscripts at the time were done on animal skin. They're not done on paper. The manuscript is bound at the edge, like your notebook, right? They're bound at the left edge. Whereas earlier, prior to Christianity, most books were in scroll form, like a Japanese screen, rolled out. But since Christians cross-reference, we've talked about this with typology, right? Christians cross-reference between the Old Testament and the New Testament, between the different Gospels, right? They really began the prominent use of the book as we know it, a codex, which is bound at the edge, okay? So this is a book, and the leaves of the book, instead of being paper, are actually animal skin, prepared animal skin. Right? Calf, young calf, vellum. I think veal is young cow, right? Vellum. And parchment is lambskin, right? And I think it says parchment. And the parchment has been prepared by having been dyed before any of the paint was put on it to give us this picture of St. Matthew. So you'll notice the border on the outside is that sort of gaudy purple. Now, I've never seen the manuscript, but I do know that the pages are dyed purple. And this is intended to be a symbol of Charlemagne as emperor. Remember that purple is an imperial color. Right? So when one opens the book, one realizes that this is a symbol of Charlemagne's new imperial status. And it was certainly intended to be a showpiece to reflect that status. And what we'll see as we look at it is that not only the purple dye, but other elements relate to this idea that he is this new emperor. Now, as you went through the book, the gospel book, right, when you got to the start of each of the gospels, it started out with a portrait of the author. That is, in fact, the first thing that you see. We did finish up Byzantine, didn't we? Did we look at the Paris Psalter on Tuesday? Yes. Yes, we did, right? I no memory. I prepare these things a week in advance, and I think we looked at the Macedonian Renaissance.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Excellent. That's what the Paris Psalter is. Okay. So just like we saw with the Paris Psalter, maybe that's my next slide. It is. Look at this. As if by magic. Like we saw with the Paris Psalter, right? That's just the book of Psalms. And when you open it up, the first thing you see is a portrait of the author engaged in the act of actually writing what you're reading. Okay? And that's the same thing for the coronation gospel. At the beginning of St. Matthew is a portrait of St. Matthew. At the beginning of Mark is a portrait of St. Mark. Etc., right? 3 to the 4, Luke and John. Right? And so it follows the same position we see here, where David, instead of, David writing music, so he's got a hurdy-gurdy or, some sort of auto harp staying on his lap, because he's writing songs. Matthew is in the act of writing. And you can see he's got the book open, some of the words are written down. He's holding in his left hand an inkwell, looks like a horn. In fact, it is a horn. That's a standard old school inkwell. In his other hand, he has a pen. He's lifted it up from the page for a second, and he's thinking about what to write next. Behind his head is this massive halo. A lot of it is badly damaged, so it looks like he's sitting in front of a shrub, but I don't think that's the original intent. Right? I got some of the damage in the book. But we see him actively engaged in writing the text we're about to read. And the same would hold true if we had time. I could show you Mark, Luke, and John. But you can also find them online too if you wanted to. Yeah.
The halo behind Matthew, is that more of a thing where it says he's in alignment with God, or is it more so and divine intention?
Divine intervention. He's a saint after all. Justinian isn't, and that's problematic with Justinian is that he just floats like you and me. Well, not just like him, but you know what I mean? He has no actual claim to a divine connection beyond being emperor. St. Mark has been sainted. The church has decided that, through the canonization process, that he is, in fact, special. And so for him, it definitely connotes that element, right? But for Justinian, it's an appropriation of that to make him look like Christ, or more like Christ, at least not look like, but be in the guise of, right? Because no one would say that looks like Jesus, Justinian, right? Because he doesn't look like him at all. So, does that answer your question well enough? Okay, good. That's who's coming up next. In addition to the purple page, the other elements of this that, again, speak this symbolic message that Charlemagne is the new Holy Roman Emperor, the other thing that ties into that is the style of the piece, the way in which the artist paints. And we can see if we look at St. Matthew that there's a great interest in modeling him in 3 dimensions. You know what I mean when I say that, right? People take drawing class to get this, right? You're shading him. So he has a lit side and a shaded side. It gives him a sense of 3-dimensionality. It makes him look more like a statue and less like a cutout figure. Right? And if you look at St. Matthew, you have really a pretty good sense of how that robe wraps around his shoulder, or his forearm, around his leg, where the 2 legs are in space. There's a pretty good sense of 3-dimensionality to the figure, achieved through shading. And that is a conscious return to the art style of ancient Rome. And that's why I brought in this wall fresco from Pompeii, which of course our painter didn't know because it was covered up in ash, right? But they were looking back at other Roman works in order to inspire them. And in this case, there we are, see them a bit bigger now, right? We actually talk about this return to Rome as being another small R Renaissance. This is the Carolingian Renaissance. Many people talk about the fact that on becoming Roman emperor, one of the things that Charlemagne did for works of art that were made for him was to consciously revive the style of art of ancient Rome. And this is one of the primary works in that, the way in which it looks like Roman wall frescoes. Now, when we talked about the Paris Psalter, we talked about the fact that it too was consciously evoking ancient Rome. Not only through its 3-dimensionality within the business of the art, but also through the use of Orpheus as a basis for David, and these allegorical figures of melody and echo and the mountains of Bethlehem that surround it. Right? It too evokes Rome. So that's another Renaissance, if you will, right? Sorry, those are in the wrong order while I talked over. So we talked about that as being the Macedonian Renaissance, right? This is now the Carolingian Renaissance. Right? Same idea of returning to ancient Rome, but for very different purposes. With the Paris Psalter, the title page here returns to Rome because it was right after the iconoclastic controversy. Right? 120 years of no art. And then looking back to ancient Rome as a way of reviving the arts after that interruption. For the coronation gospels and the artists working for Charlemagne, it's political. They're trying to send a message to the style of the work that Rome is revived here and now. This is the new Roman emperor. And this goes hand in hand with other things that Charlemagne was doing to tell the people that I'm the new Roman emperor. I'm the only Roman emperor. And part of that was in all those areas that he conquered, going over to Denmark, down to Italy, over to Spain. Right? In all those areas, he replaced local monetary currency with a single kind of currency, the Carolingian coin, that would be used everywhere within the empire. Right? Kind of like the euro when it was introduced in 2002. Right? Replaced the franc and the guilder and the the lira and all of that. He's going to replace everything with a coin that is symbolic of this new empire. And on one side is his face, going right back to old Roman times. And we do that too. And on the opposite side was his motto, the renewal of the Roman Empire. So he is spreading all sorts of messages about reviving the Roman Empire. And our manuscript, which in style refers to this, but also in the dying purple of the page, fits directly into what we know was his agenda. Convincing people that this title given to him by the Pope is more than just what you said, just as more than something just changing hands. Right? There's actually really means something to benefit people. So this fits directly into that. Now what's interesting about Carolingian art and the Carolingian dynasty is that this interest in Roman art doesn't last all that long. In fact, Charlemagne, as Holy Roman Emperor, is only emperor for about, I think, 14 years. Then he dies in age 14. So, after he dies, power passes to his oldest son, in the old Roman fashion. And what's interesting is that art that's made during the period of his son's reign doesn't have the same focused interest in ancient Rome that we see with Charlemagne's works. It lasts about as long as Charlemagne lasts. And dies out after his son. So it seems to be part of his agenda, right? To get the Roman Empire going. Yeah? To illustrate this, let's look at the same manuscript page from a different manuscript made during the reign of Louis the Pious. This was made for a court member under Louis. The court member was the archbishop of a city in France named Ebo. So we refer to this as the Ebo Gospel. There's a name you don't hear much anymore, and probably with good reason. Hi, little Ebo's just looking for him on the playground. Just bounced down the hill. And you can see we've got Matthew pretty much in the same position, right? Got the same sort of podium we have up here, though, right, with those turned wooden supports. Feet kind of in the same position, still carrying the horn full of ink, got the pen, but the style of the piece is drastically different. Let's talk about art style here. What is different about the Ebo Gospels? We were talking about the style of the work. How would you describe its differences? The pose is similar, but what about the differences in how the figure is conceived? Yeah, Mark. Disheveled. That's the term that hasn't come up yet. I guess kind of through the years. Yeah, yeah. Remember when we looked at? It's kind of interesting. Remember when we looked at ancient Greek art, and we talked about the sort of skull caps that the classical Greek period had, which was much more sedate, the much more wild hair that we saw in the Hellenistic period, which was much more dramatic and active. We kind of have the same thing here, don't we? I'm not saying I'm looking at Hellenistic art or anything, but it has the same effect that the Hellenistic period did. I mean, this is disheveled. I think that's a good word for it, right? There's something about it that's messier. His hair is messier. His robe seems messier. What else did you point to, Carlos?
The coordination documents to the right, the background is more, that's the word. Yeah.
More different.
Abstract.
Oh.
Abstract, and the left, where the left is more, just, it's trying to give a background while the right is focused on the action.
Okay,
More detail.
right.
The things that don't involve that.
So certainly much more simplified, right? The coronation gospel is. Now you still notice that in the sky, there is a sense of trying to get the atmosphere of the sky, right, the way it lightens down toward the bottom there. And again, it's damaged, so it's hard to make a firm judgment, but there's a lot less around him. And I think when Mark mentioned that it seems more disheveled, it's also busier, right? And as we look at the background behind you, you'll notice that it's been tipped up so that the land, the ground where he's sitting looks like almost like a hill behind him, or like maybe we're looking at him from the side, we're looking at the landscape from the top, and it fills up about 5/6 of the entire composition, and you have those little buildings and whatnot, and trees. I always thought it looked like Dr. Seuss trees, on the left, I'm beyond Zebra. All the places you'll go, right? But trees like this that just seem kind of awkward, and it adds a different feeling to this. It's noisier, if you will. We use that term for visual art. It's noisier. Whereas in the coronation gospel, everything is horizontal and it's much more sort of restful and, as you mentioned, not distracting at all. It's just a background foil for it. Let me finish this up, Mark, and we'll get you. Another thing you point to with that idea of restfulness and peacefulness that you mentioned in the background is also the way in which the robe has been painted. You'll notice that with the coronation gospel, the way the painter makes the fall of light and dark on the robe is through washes, right? So you end up with a sort of gradual move from light to dark through tones of gray, or maybe other colors as well. And believe me, these pictures are so far removed from the real object, I can't tell you what it really looks like. The purple just throws off any Photoshop attempt to try to do anything, right? On the left, you see that the move from light to dark is handled through all these really sharp-edged lines, right? That add to, I think, what Mark mentioned to begin with, which was the disheveled or busy nature of it, right? And that sense of distraction, too. I'd Mark first, then Jacqueline.
He also doesn't have a halo.
He doesn't have a halo. Indeed, he's much more earthbound in that way. I think when we tie that to what Carlos had just said about the sky in the background, the cross-section, here he's down here on the earth. It's almost like he's stuck here in a way, bound up to the earth. Jacqueline.
Wait, when you're looking at it from like this perspective, like the dimensions just kind of seem off, like the angles don't really tend up. There's usually like a center, and then like the lines kind of go out slowly.
Yeah.
It doesn't really seem like that.
It doesn't work. There's the sense of, now we don't have a word, the word perspective is sort of best reserved for those things when you've got a mathematical system with a single vanishing point, right? And we looked at Roman art and we saw that they had actually tried very much to get a sense of three-dimensionality on the surface through having things look like they understood the vanishing point, but they don't, right? They don't quite line up. And I think that the the Coronation Gospels has a greater sense of that kind of working, right? The base of the lectern rests on something, right? Here it's like it's behind the footstool and doesn't really rest on anything. Is that kind of what you were thinking about? Is that it?
The angle like the bottom of the I don't know.
Yeah, it's got this multiple point perspective in a way, right? It's got this certain things are seen from this way and certain things are seen from this way, right? From the top, from the side. And even the buildings that are on the horizon have that sort of jumbled nature. Now, I could show you Roman art that does this too, but I think if we look at the two of them, that adds to this sort of disheveled nature. Marie?
Do you know what the figure is in the upper right hand?
I do know what the figure is in the upper right-hand corner, and I'll talk to you about that in just a second. Hold Hold your breath. We'll get there. I don't want to continue with this style thing because there's a few things we haven't really gotten to with it, and then we'll talk about some of those details.
I know it's the one right kind of like I don't know, it's just like weird at the bottom. But on the left, like I was there was kind of what's that on the left?
On the left, this right here, that's just a podium for here. It almost looks like it's got a roof. I'm not sure if it is or not. Right? And then both these. In fact, that kind of turned leg that you see that's holding it up, that's this X-shaped chair are in fact based on Roman furniture as well. It's not just a chair, it's all over Roman furniture. Right? So that's certainly part of it. Let's think about the effect that these changes have. Mark used the term disheveled. Look at the two faces of the two sacred athletes. Is there a different sort of psychological effect?
The one on the left was distressed.
He is worried, isn't he? Now, if you think about the whole idea of what we're seeing here, right? He's busy writing the life of Christ. And he's writing it after Christ has died. Okay? And, and we go back to what Marvin mentioned about the halo and what Carlton mentioned about the background. And then I had sort of turned that into, okay, he's stuck here on the world. That's kind of why I was doing that. Here's this guy, he looks much more human this way, in a strange way. This looks more realistic, the coronation costume. But there's something much more emotional about the Evogos. Expressive. And he's got his eyebrows in it. Like, okay, let me you're going to write the life of Christ. And you get one more wrong. Christ is dead. It's like that anxiety, isn't it? And it seems like he's got that. And if we tie that into where they are, look what we got here. And this is so much more classical than we think back to the ancient world. He's not writing anymore. He's taking the moment on top. He's thinking about it, right? He's pulled his head off the table, off the paper. He's already written some stuff. You can see that the book is lined for where he's going to write the words. Here. And he's already written some words, although they haven't. Right? But he's already writing it. Okay, right? And in the Evo Gospel, he hasn't written a darn thing, right? Have you ever had this happen in jail? It happened in grad school. They had on business art. They had an essay prompt and two you could choose from. I don't know what he knew. So I just sat there with the open page and wasn't looking at it. Right? And he's worrying about it, right? And you can even see that the book, Matthew's book, is bound together. You can get this on the spine. The coronation gospel is bound together. But the Evo Gospel is still loose leaf. Right? Each of the pages hasn't even been put in the book yet. He's so early in the process. So I think that anxiety and the disheveled nature adds to that. But I think what the artist wants us to be looking at is that as a symbol for inspiration. Because Matthew is writing based on experience, but inspired by the Holy Spirit. Inspired by God. In either of the two. But with the coronation gospel, that inspiration is from this classical idea of the mental, right? Inside his head. And he doesn't even worry about it, because he's confident in that sort of Greco-Roman way. So the Evo Matthew is stuck here. He's like he's nervous and worried, and his inspiration doesn't seem to be confident about what's coming from within. I had Lonnie first start. So Lonnie, I'm trying to put you off the phone.
So you kind of said, I was just going to talk about the way that we're starting first.
Yeah.
And so you come out as you can see the pages,
yeah. What's interesting is that the way that is turned is more close to the way that you would really make a manuscript. The way the manuscripts were made throughout the Middle Ages is that they weren't always written by just one person. So each person to get the manuscript made more quickly is often taken voluntary. But they would be made by the different monks working together at the same time. And you would give one page to one person, one page to the other person, and you get another back. Right? And it was in the book of the assembly. And the way it worked was that each person had a part of the book that was like this, and something would be the front of one page, the back of one page, the front of one page, the front of one page, and the back of one page. But it wasn't like, this is not how a book was bound. It wasn't bound like that. It was bound like this. Right? So, if you got a front and back of the two, that's not necessarily this back to this. Does that make sense? Because it was bound in a series of usually groups of 8. And then those would be stuck together. Okay? So he's really early on, and you can see the edge of the paper like this, right? He's about to start here, there. The other thing he's got to worry about is he starts off on the wrong part of the page. You know, and in ink on compared to animal skin, it's not the least. Like some of those contrasts and because it's hard to do. Right? So that nervousness is right there. Yeah? Georgie, looks like you're about to say something or not? Were you raising your hand? Georgie? Okay, go ahead, Thomas.
Well, my question would be, this is to rain.
Yeah.
Right, is showing left the sun. Could you say like right? It's like expressing that feeling the emotion of like confidence, like knowing what to do before she wants you to exemplify that feeling back in the room that they should like not worry that you bring the room back, and then on the left you have the sun that's trying to follow the footsteps and feel pressure.
Right. Well, I think that's interesting way of looking at the two of them, but I think that there are elements there that I would agree with, and other elements that are a little bit more problematic. The coronation gospel we know was made for Charlemagne. The one on the left was made for Archbishop Ebbo, who was part of the court. So that makes that a little bit more difficult, right? At the same time, one can talk about what the philosopher Hegel called the zeitgeist, the spirit of the age. That the spirit of the age under Charlemagne himself would have been one of much more confidence, blah, 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 blah. And the spirit of the age under Louis the Pious might be slightly different. So that's where that would fit together. That said, I think the big thing that comes out of that way of looking at the two as exemplifying a change over this 20 years, right? Maybe less, is a change from the need to really drive home the idea that Rome is reborn to something else, right? Where that need is not nearly so strong. Now, why does that result in this kind of style? That's hard to say for sure. But what we're going to see in the coming centuries after this, right, is that while we like Renaissances as historians, humanists, as people that live in a logical world, we like our Renaissances. We like things to be rational. What we're going to see as we look at medieval art, later medieval art, that for the next 400 years, the style on the left is by far the more commonly seen. Because it's a little bit more abstract, like the anti-classical style that we've already seen, because it fits Christian's purposes in a way, I expect them, right? So, it raises all sorts of really interesting questions, right? And I think you're on the right track with that.
I was going to say, like, curly hair versus straight hair, since curly hair is more like flag days, it's shuffled in, and straight hair.
Yeah. Indeed, and that's because, and again, if you think about what the figure's doing at this point, right? Right? And he's relying on his internal abilities. Whereas this one's not worried, and this brings on Maureen, your question, right? Do I know what that thing in the corner is? Well, first, there's our Dr. Smith tree. And you'll notice that that sort of busy, linear treatment, right? Lots of lines, is everywhere, from the shading of that hill to the treatment of the temples, on the hill, the trees, even the side of his face with that incredibly worried look, because he hasn't started really to write yet. Right? And now, what we can see is that the figure in the upper right corner appears to be an angel. Right? Can you see it now? A head with wings? And throughout the Middle Ages, the common way of showing angels was as not showing the entire body. Right? You also would just see head and shoulders with wings and not the entire thing. And so, what the angel is doing, or what this figure, the winged figure here is doing, is holding a scroll, that old kind of book. And you can see it almost on old toilet paper, right? But it's coming out here, and so there's the scroll that the angel has, with words on it, with the angel with the head, wings, right? The body sort of disappears. And the scroll into this ink that's running into this well. It's filling this well with inspiration. And our poor St. Matthew on the other gospel seems almost like he's in a doubt. It's a very human side of things, very emotional, expressive side, which is quite different from the church tradition, from the stability and the confidence of the coronation. Now, it's worth noting here that the figure that we're seeing here is actually not an angel. Okay. We've seen quite a few winged humans going back to Roman art, and the tendency is just to call them all angels, because, we're so used to that from Valentine's culture. Right? But throughout, from early Christian times on, each of the four writers of the Gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, each one of them was given a symbol. And this was based on two different texts. One in Ezekiel, and one in the book of Revelation. And in each of these texts, the writer, Ezekiel in page 1, had a vision where heaven opened up to them, and they saw four winged creatures descend to earth. Right? And these were a man with wings, a lion with wings, an ox with wings, the last one was an eagle, which is prophetic. Right? So each of these two writers in the book read to the same vision. And theologians, looking back at the whole gospel, realize, this is typology, right? That each of these is symbolic of one of the four accounts of the life of Christ. For reasons I'm not going to go into. Suffice to say that Matthew, the book of Matthew starts off with the human lineage of Christ, right? So-and-so begat so-and-so and goes along the book, right? And all the way down into the Jesus. Thus, the man. Right? Mark talks quite a bit about John the Baptist, right? The lion in the desert. I am but his voice, too, and so forth. So, through the Middle Ages, each one of our gospel writers has a particular figure that is associated with that. So our little figure up here is Matthew's symbol, right? It's not an angel per se, but it is symbol based on need, and that's a strong medieval condition. Right? Where else can we see it? In one of the online things we talked about this is the religion. Right? So that's what this goes back to Maureen's question from before. The figure in the corner that looks like an angel is in fact the symbol of St. Matthew. That whether you call it an angel or not, it's doing the same thing. It's inspiring him. And he's shown at the moment where he's not quite sure if he trusts it yet. Right? What's coming up next? The Carolingian dynasty, and I'm not going to go into this in great depth, but the Carolingian dynasty basically comes to an end because Louis the Pious, the son of Charlemagne, decided when he died in 843 that he would split the empire between his three sons. Oops. Right? That's always a mistake. Read King Lear. Right? It's always a mistake to split up an empire. But he does. Gives like the middle part to one son, Spain to another, and Germany to another. And then when they die, they split their respective parts between their kids. And as people start to die here or there, it just becomes this mess. And the empire doesn't come back together, doesn't coalesce again until around the year 1000, or almost 200 years after Charlemagne here. Right? Because the end of the Carolingian dynasty was this fragmentation of the Holy Roman Empire. And as it starts to come back together again, the Pope again steps in and says, "Ha, you're the new guy." They're not even related to the Carolingians. They're not related at all to Charlemagne's family. But there are three emperors in a row named Otto. Otto the first, Otto the second, Otto the third. Right around the year 1000. So historians refer to this second major dynasty of the Holy Roman Empire as being the Ottonian dynasty, the Ottos. Okay? It's around the year 1000. And one of the primary works that we talk about, I believe in one of the art fixes, is this set of doors for Bishop Bernward in the time of Hildesheim, Germany, who was the tutor. Right? He taught young Otto III everything he needed to know. So he's tight with the court circle. For our purposes here, I want to reiterate something from that art fix, which is that this nervous, energetic, busy style, particularly seen in the drapery of St. Mark, continues here. Where everything is told through gesture. You notice, by the way, that everybody here is Big Body Parts Club. This is Christ judging Adam and Eve just after they've eaten the apple. Okay? That's God. But he takes on the form of Christ to judge Adam and Eve. And he's pointing at Adam saying, didn't I tell you not to eat from that tree? And look at the size of that hand. Right? Big, massive, like he's been stung by a bee and he's allergic or something. Not that God would ever be allergic, but it's huge. And it emphasizes gesture. Same thing with Matthew's hand here. Look at the size of that hand. And in fact, think about the articulation of the body here. But his hand is as long as his forearm. Right? And the forearm is about half the size of his upper arm. That sort of classical rationality that you think is gone. And the same thing holds true here. 20 years later, under the next dynasty, that figure of the judgmental God, the guy of Christ, has the same busy linearity to the world, but the body parts don't fit together in order to emphasize that gesture, the gesture of judgment. You, Adam, didn't do what I told you to. So as I mentioned before, to Carlos's question, this expressive style that we see with the other Gospels is one of the most important styles for the later part of the Middle Ages. And we see it more often than we see any kind of interest in ancient Rome, although we still see that interest. You'll also notice behind Adam and Eve that the tree looks very much like our Dr. Seuss tree here. There are these elements that reappear here with great frequency. Also the expressiveness of the face. Now this is a piece of cast bronze as part of a massive set of doors. But there is Adam trying to push off the blame, right? God has pointed at him and said, I told you not to do that. And Adam, typical, right? Blame the women. So, not my fault. I'm so sorry. I'm understanding. I'm like, she made me do it. You know? It's pointing over behind him at Eve. And Eve is also in the same way, looking at Adam, his judgment, and she too is gesturing. And all these gestures are highlighted against the background. And he's pointing down at the serpent, who kind of looks like one of those old Roman serpents that we saw in the Jonah imagery, or in the Areopagus. But he's pointing down at Satan and saying, I didn't do it. It's Satan, the devil made me do it. Right? And look what the demon is doing. He's barking back and saying, ha, 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 laughing at her. Right? Because you can't really blame Satan. You make the choice. Right? So everything is about gesture and expression. And this is something that continues through art made during the Holy Roman Empire, from the Carolingian dynasty here to the Ottonian. One of the things that's new in this second dynasty is that we begin to see, alongside this more energetic style that continues, we also begin to see the influence of Byzantine art. If we look at the figure of God as he judges Adam and Eve, right, this is the same picture but seen from the side. You'll notice that he carries the book in one hand and raises his hand in judgment with the other. This is that image of the Pantocrator that we saw in icons, and then in one of the pendant art fixes is discussed in Byzantine churches. It's a Byzantine type, right down to the squared nimbus behind its head. But the holding of the book and the gesturing in judgment comes from a prototype that was adopted now by the West. Now we can put this into particular historical context. That's one of the things we try to do, is to explain the historical context. Why are they adopting Byzantine types during the Ottonian dynasty? Why has the enemy, the Holy Roman Empire, picked up things from the Byzantine Empire? This has to do with an attempt to broker a peace, a settlement between the two halves of Old Rome. Emperor Otto II had married the daughter of the Byzantine emperor. She brought her court with her to the Ottonian court. And that means that around the year 1000, we start to see a lot of Byzantine influence in Holy Roman art in the Ottonian dynasty. Okay. Theophanu, yeah, that was her name. That's the daughter of the Byzantine emperor. Now, so this is the doors that came. And if you're looking at that, these right here, these are like 12 feet tall, cast in a single piece, which is pretty incredible. So the door knocker is about this level, right? You have the only separate piece of metal is the ring line here. But each of them shows the creation of man here and the life of Christ on the opposite side. And then architects discuss this. So we look at these two as our primary examples of works of art done for the Holy Roman Empire, right? Bishop Bernward was the tutor, as I mentioned before, of Otto III, and of course, Charlemagne himself. The power of the Holy Roman Empire began to wane almost immediately after, at the very end of the Ottonian dynasty. And it has to do with the fact that there was always a question about who answers to whom in politics. The Holy Roman Emperor had always been crowned by the Pope. And since the Emperor owed his power to the papal blessing, does he then have to answer to the Pope for things that he does? Does the Pope then have more power than the Emperor does? This has always been sort of a lingering question. Speaking of which, right, you know about Napoleon, right, early 19th century? Napoleon Bonaparte, right? He was going to be crowned as Emperor of France by the Pope in this fashion. And he summoned the Pope to come to him in Paris to crown him. And as the Pope is about to put the crown on his head, Napoleon reaches up and grabs it and puts it on his own head, because he doesn't want to be beholden to the Pope. He doesn't want to have to answer to the Pope for anything. Right? This was already a problem in the Middle Ages. Forget the 19th century, right? It was already a problem in the Middle Ages. And it led to an open conflict. I mean warfare between the imperial forces and the papal forces. At the end of the 1000s, at the end of the 11th century, so about a generation after the Ottos, this all comes to a head. It's called the investiture conflict because investiture is creating an official office. You invest the office. And because it's centered around who answers to whom, does the emperor owe his status to the Pope? Or does he have that status independently? And the Pope simply recognizes it. Right? This becomes a huge problem between Henry IV, who is, I believe, the grandson of Otto III, and Pope Gregory VII, around the year 1060, 1070. Right? Massive blow up between the two of them. Carlos.
So that was just in the Holy Roman Emperor, and so
exactly.
What was the Byzantine Emperor doing?
Yeah, right around this time where really they're having their own troubles with their borders. I took you the three maps kind of in quick succession that showed the Byzantine Empire sort of getting smaller and smaller. this is after the period of the Macedonian Renaissance, and they've got a bunch of their own problems with their own borders at this point. And there was that attempt to sort of bring the two back together through marriage, but that is a fairly short-lived thing. It is one of the principal avenues by which Western art picks up Byzantine traditions, but it's not huge lasting effect, right? It's certainly not politically, I don't think it does. So, I think they're kind of, fight your own bill, you fight your own battles, I got mine, right? So, an open conflict called the investiture conflict. And basically, during the course of this conflict, which lasted for the better part of 50 years, just not only with these two popes, it just starts with them. We see at one point the Pope excommunicates the Emperor. Excommunication, you know what that is? He can't enter a church anywhere in Europe, anywhere in Christianity. Right? Which makes his life more than a little difficult. Right? And in response, Henry IV gets his forces and goes and invades Rome. The Holy Roman Emperor sacks Rome. Drives out the Pope into exile. Right? It's literally a mess. Right? And this lasts through the later part of the 11th century. At one point, the Pope demands that the Emperor beg forgiveness in the snow, in his underwear, in the mountains, 3 straight days before he'll forgive him. It's a great story, right? The investiture conflict is. By around 1120, it's finally resolved more or less in favor of the Church. The Holy Roman Emperor, the decision, the settlement agreement, if you will, said that the Emperor had dominion, independent dominion. Doesn't need to worry about the Pope for this. But when it came to his earthly possessions, his lands, right, the feudal system, the kings that answered to them, the peasants that answered to those kings, right? That part was his and his alone. He had power over that. But he had absolutely no power over any lands held by the Church. And the Church was also entered into a feudal agreement with a great piece of land. So the Church was independent from imperial control. At the same time, the Emperor was left needing the Church for his, his connection with the Christian people of his dominion. Right? It really weakened the power of the Holy Roman Emperors. And they're never quite as strong again as they were under the Carolingians and the Etonians, even though the Holy Roman Empire lasts all the way pretty much to World War I. But they'll never have the kind of power they had in the 9th and 10th centuries. Okay? So what we have is a balance of power within Western Europe. Around the year 1100 is a shift from the Holy Roman Emperor back to the Church having something like total power. And perhaps that they're most powerful politically at any point in their history. Right around the year 1100. And all because of the investiture conflict. Right? It's the shift of power away from the empire and to the papacy. And what we begin to see as we look at buildings and works of art during this time is that churches use architecture and sculpture to proclaim their power, to proclaim their domination over Europe. Church architecture turns wholeheartedly to Roman architectural types. Remember that Roman architecture was the arch, right? We saw that in a number of different places. The Romans loved the arch, the rounded arch. And architecture during the investiture conflict also begins to use the arch as a symbol of power. It points back to Rome. But they're pointing back to Rome because the papacy is there. They are unified. Because of the architect's use of Roman architectural types, historians have called this period of the Middle Ages the churches are sponsoring works of art, and the architecture in particular is turning back to ancient Rome. The other reason we call it Romanesque is that we also see for the first time since ancient Rome large-scale sculpture, life-size or larger, which had been a staple of art throughout most of the Roman Empire. But as it shifted to the Byzantine Empire, that started to die out. We had smaller sculptures, like those bronze doors, but nothing monumental, nothing life-sized or bigger. And in the Romanesque period, we see this as well. For example, these sculptures over the top of the doorway into the church at Autun, the church of Saint Lazare. Lazarus, the man that Jesus raised from the dead, later, according to legend, moved to France with Mary Magdalene and Martha, sisters, right? And they all died there. You know, Lazarus was raised from the dead, but he doesn't die. His mind's not still around. And this is the church where his relics were housed. This is where you can go see the body of Lazarus, Saint Lazare, in the city of Autun. And you can see as you look at the doorway, again, that use of the rounded Roman archway that is typical of the Romanesque, but also the huge sculptures that surround the door. Life size or larger. A figure in the foreground gives you a sense of scale. That said, the figural style of those sculptures has nothing to do with Rome. It doesn't look like any Roman sculpture. It's big, and that's where the similarity ends. Instead, the figures are elongated. All of the bends are angular. The drapery flows, as you can see slightly here, go back to that expressive style that we saw with the Evo Gospels. That remains the prominent style. So it's Roman in some ways, but not in others, not in the style of the work. And so you can compare the styles of the human bodies, the angular bends to the knees, but also the way the drapery is down. You look at God here, this figure here, and how it's swirling around. You get a sense of it being very, very similar to that. Now, one of the primary places where we see these sculptures is over the door, in this half circle on top of the doorway. That area of the church decoration is called the tympanum. We'll talk about the different areas here. The tympanum here. The lintel down below, they'll be sliding like this. And these arches on the outside called an archivolt. Originally, everything was decorated. This was lost during the French Revolution. But we have what remains on the outside here, as well as the main tympanum, which we're going to look at. These sculptures that appear on the tympanum are also used to emphasize the power of the church. The subject here is the Last Judgment. Does anyone know what the Last Judgment is? Ever heard that term before? Yeah? Jackie? Sorry? Indeed. We remember the Pantocrator image we saw, right? We saw an icon with Christ as the judge. Had the book of life, right? He's about, you don't know what he's going to do. He's going to cast you out or welcome you in. Well, the Last Judgment is similar to that, and it's meant to be the very end of all time, right? And it relates to various parts of the Bible that are brought together, but in particular elements out of the book of Revelation, where at the end of time, God comes back to earth, or Christ comes back to earth. And at that point, anybody that had already died is separated, is judged. Are you good? Can you come to heaven? Are you bad? Do you have to go to hell? Right? That's Doyle and I were going to teach a class called Go to Hell. She was all this ago when that image was this. Everybody would sign up for that, wouldn't they? Go to hell. Anyway, that's what's happening here. So Christ has come back, and he's going to separate the saved from the damned, the heavenly from the hellish. Okay? And that's Jesus right in the middle. And you'll notice he's got his arms out to the side, right? As he's now passing judgment. Now, this is obviously a scene that is all about the church's power, right? Christ, his representatives on the church, right, within the church, have the power to determine, to discern the good from the bad. And it's proclaimed to you here almost to scare the heck out of you just before you go inside this particular church. And what we see in Romanesque art is that these sculptures that adorn the front of Romanesque churches have a tendency to show images of the miraculous appearance of heaven on earth. Usually Christ coming back to earth from heaven. And that simply supports the power that the church has. They are his mediators here on earth until he comes back. And this is what happens when he does come back. So our last judgment is very much an image of power. An image of judgment. We'll look at some details of this because it's quite fascinating in the business. There's Christ in the middle. He's seated on his heavenly throne. His arms are up to the side. That almond shape around him is meant to be a symbol for heaven opening up. Right? So if you imagine a sphere that would open up like a circle, right? It would end up giving you that almond shape as heaven opened up. Right? And Christ, more or less, is revealed through that. You'll notice that the throne he sits on, his heavenly throne, is a Romanesque building. It's a building with Roman arches, both beneath his feet and under his hips. Right? Again, during this period, they love Roman architecture, and they're using it as a symbol of power. So Christ is coming back, and he is about to separate the saved from the damned. The saved are on his right. They're on your left. This is because throughout the Middle Ages, the right side was seen as the blessed side, whereas the left side was seen as the damned side. This is what to this day, right? We say, yeah, you're right. You're correct. Yeah? We use the word right as a synonym for correctness, for goodness, upright. Yeah? So on Christ's right, because he's the one making the judgment, you have the good. We'll see on the left, much more fun. Bad. Yeah? Go ahead, Chuck. Indeed, that's exactly why left-handers were not allowed to remain left-handers if they were within the literary part of society, right? And it becomes a big thing when Leonardo da Vinci, who's a lefty, decides to just go ahead and do it, right? Because he doesn't believe in that sort of poppycock, right? But the Latin word for left is sinistra, sinister. So we get the word for sinister, right? It's also left. So the good on the right, Christ's right, because he's the judge, and the bad on his left. And so here we see the saved being welcomed into heaven. We have angels down here, this kind of really archangels. They're welcoming people, they're bringing them up. I know it's very busy. It's that same nervous jitteriness that we saw with that expressive evocatus. This little soul being welcomed. Here the apostles are as they move their way toward Christ. There's the Virgin Mary up above on her throne with an angel next to her. And you'll notice all these cute little souls in their rooms in heaven. They've already been welcomed in. You know, Christ says, my Father's mansion has many rooms. And here we see them. And again, they're all Roman arches. This is indeed heaven itself. So, at the end of time, the saved are being welcomed and ushered toward Christ. Right? They're moving toward his right hand. And there's the Virgin Mary up above you here with an angel blowing the trumpet, sounding the end of time. On the opposite side, on Christ's left, on your right, we see demons weighing the souls and trying to affect the outcome, and taking the damned souls and kissing them into hell. And like I said, that's way more cool, right? So we have, let me see if I got a detail to that. Yeah. Immediately off of Christ's left hand, it's broken, but you can see there's a set of scales here, right? Only one of the arms of the scales is there, hanging from heaven, a cloud itself, and what's happening is the souls are being weighed. And what they're weighing is goodness, right? Because, and this goes back to lots of biblical verses, but they want to find out how good you are. So at least Christ says, and if you're good, if you're heavy, you weigh the goodness, right? Then you will be welcomed into heaven. But if you're lightweight, you're going to get kicked out. So our demons are these amazing faces, and they can't wait to attack people with like toads that they have in their hands. They're scowling, deformed faces. And they're doing everything they can to help determine the outcome of this judgment. So there's a poor little soul on the left there, riding in one of the two hands, and the angels are not ready to take him out because he's good, right? It's gone down. But on the other side, you see the demons are doing everything they can to make it look like he's bad. Pulling down on the arm of the scale, one of the little baby demons jumps inside his hand on the other side to show that that's, hopefully make that soul be that much more lightweight. And then in the upper right corner, we see more demons who are taking the souls themselves. Here they are, oh my God, I didn't make it, right? And they're pushing them headlong down the side here, toward the bottom. So this is the damned side, if you will. Yeah. Let me just tell you one more thing about this, and I think this is all in your textbook as well. But there's an inscription at the bottom of this. And it runs, you can see some of the words here, all the way across the bottom. And what it says, under the good, everyone who does not lead a sinful life shall rise again. An endless light of day shall shine for him. That's a good thing, right? You make it if you're good. And under the demon side, it said, here let fear strike those bound by earthly sin, for their fate is shown by the horror of these figures. This is meant to scare you. It's like medieval scared straight. If you're bad, this is what you can expect to happen. Eternal mockery, right? Okay, we'll finish Romanesque and do Gothic starting on Tuesday. Not Tuesday, what's today? Monday, thank you. Yeah, and I will be getting some worksheets up, I promise. Soon.